The world is changing, and if I were an 18-year-old, I'd find it a very scary place. And it must be hard for children to be in school and to be told, go and find your place in the world. Because of one simple thing, we don't know what the world is going to look like in the future. So if I talk about change in education, what would that change look like? Changes in tests, changes in evaluation, or simple changes like the structure of the school day. So we acknowledge that change is coming, but how quickly is that change upon us? Some people are actually beginning to say that this is possibly the last human century. Alternatively, we are on the brink of significant change, not just in terms of education, but in terms of humanity. And it is this world of uncertainty that we are preparing our students for. So we have to ask ourselves quite simply, what is the purpose of education? Is education to inform? Well, if so, how can we give students information which will not be relevant in 20 or 30 years' time? Yes, as teachers we need to educate to give information and knowledge, but we cannot treat students just as passive recipients of information. We need to recognize that students have to be able to learn for themselves, to be independent learners. Many models of education are literally 100 years out of date. Students would, in the past, go to school, learn ideas, and then go out into one job where they would stay for life. Those days have gone. The top 10 jobs of 2010 were not even invented in 2004. So, we need to encourage students to take responsibility for their own learning, to realize that learning is lifelong, not just in school. Because we're facing some pretty big challenges as a planet, we're going to need some pretty big thinking and big innovation, and people who can work together effectively. That, in my understanding, is the purpose of education. And there are already models out there. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are many good examples of excellent practice around the world. We need to encourage students to become more independent. If education were a bicycle, as teachers, we're scared to take off the stabilizers. At the end of the week, the students bounce out the school gates full of energy, full of life, and we crawl out utterly exhausted. And that's the wrong way round. They should be the ones who are tired because they should be the ones doing all the work. So, the idea of a teacher, a good teacher being the one who does all the work, that's out of date. Teachers should not be didactic, telling students what to think, how to think, and what the answers are. They need to set up learning experiences, facilitate good learning, and then step back and allow the students to learn. After all, at the moment, when students achieve, it's the teachers who can feel proud because the teachers have had such an input. But what we should be after is students who feel proud of their own achievements. In 2010, in England, the government financed 21 academics to look into this problem. And their aim was to find the 5 biggest challenges for humanity, irrespective of government and politics. And I would be very surprised if anyone in here disagreed with their findings. The students we're teaching now are going to live longer. And they're going to live in very different relationships from the ones we currently experience. Their understanding of their identity and their citizenship will be very different from those of our grandparents. The way in which they learn and share learning and knowledge will change. Quite simply, the notion of the workplace, going to work at 9, leaving at 5, I think that is slowly coming to an end. And the relationship between where they work and other companies and the state all around the world, this is slowly changing. These are the things I think are undeniable. Okay, that's all been quite negative and miserable. So let's look on the bright side. In England, in 1999, 6 schools recognized that change was coming, and they decided that they needed to move things forward. To do that, they recognized that teachers must share knowledge, subject knowledge, but as you can see, there are a number of skills that schools must also teach students. But this isn't just about students, it's about the whole community. As teachers, we often share information, but do we teach students how to manage that information, what to do with it mentally? Life at the moment is full of tricky situations, and they're going to become trickier as we go on. So in schools, we need to highlight these for students and teach them how to manage situations, how to manage other people. As teachers, we need to model what good learning looks like, explain to them what's happening in our minds as we learn something so they understand what it feels like. Now, I don't know about the situation here in Poland, but in England, the situation or the experience of a child from primary school to secondary school is very, very different. Suddenly they come into secondary school and they are having a number of different lessons throughout the week. They may have had 1 or 2 teachers, now they've got 12, 15 teachers. Their English teacher doesn't know what the maths teacher's doing, the maths teacher doesn't know what the history teacher's doing. There's no continuity. And yes, it will get the students some qualifications at the end, but it's all a highly artificial environment. But in their discussions, the RSAs discovered this is what they wanted education to be. They wanted learning to be fun, not to be about just a process. They wanted there to be an enjoyment of learning. They wanted students to feel that they had ownership of what they were doing in the classroom. And they wanted students to be able to understand that what they learnt in the classroom had a relevance in the real world. This all sounds like big thinking, but not doable. We did it. In our school, and I can only talk about our experience, for our youngest year group, back in 2000, we started from scratch. We got rid of teaching individual subjects and taught topics instead. Each teacher knew exactly what the other teacher was teaching, and we planned the curriculum for cohesion and clarity. So, for example, in Year 7, one topic is the topic of human life. An example of a student school day would be, in English, they would read a book about a boy with a heart defect. Then the science teacher would come in and do a heart dissection. In PE, the students would exercise and take their own pulse rate. Then they would take that to the maths teacher, who would help them to plot it on graphs. And then at the end of the day in drama, they would be the blood cells flowing through the heart, acting it out. Earlier on I mentioned skills. We make sure that in our lesson plans, our lessons have both subject knowledge, but skills as well. So for example, I'm an English teacher. I will be teaching them about poetry, but at the same time, I will be teaching them reasoning skills, and then ask them to go and apply those reasoning skills in other lessons. We've taken topics which in the past were decontextualized, had no context. So for example, as an English teacher, I used to get them to write letters to the head persuading him to ban school uniform. But that wasn't very good, it was too abstract. So now I get them to identify times in their life where persuasion will be needed. For example, I have a boy who complained that at Sunday dinner, his mum never gave him as many potatoes as his older brother. He and I sat down. He wrote a persuasive speech for the next Sunday dinner, persuading his mum to give him more potatoes. So the learning actually has personal relevance to him rather than just an abstract concept that has no help. We also recognise that students can sometimes have better ideas than teachers. We know what we want them to achieve, but too often we tell them how they're going to achieve it. And some of the best learning can take place when you negotiate with the students how to achieve. For example, a couple of years ago, a geography teacher told me a story. She said she was going to teach some students about volcanoes. Only when she explained to the students, they said, "Miss, can we have a debate about it?" And she said, "No, you can't debate a volcano. It's not something that is or isn't." So the students went away and rewrote the lesson plan. They came back and they debated volcanoes. Some of them were the farmers, some of them were the tourists, some of them were people who lived close to the volcano. So the teacher achieved what she wanted, but the students had complete ownership of how it was done in the lesson. So what we have in our school is a new curriculum, one in which we don't talk about what we're learning, we talk about how we're learning. And this is across the whole school. So, I talked about the fact that education needs to change because the world is changing. If education is to change, we need to change on a number of levels, recognizing that the way in which we teach in the classroom now is not necessarily going to help students in their futures. We have to ask teachers to reflect upon what they feel is their role within education. This needs to be supported by the senior leadership team, who for their part need to revisit what is the role of education in the 21st century.